come through. It's
Bill. Oh, stop it. Goodbye to Steven Matz. Traded to Toronto yesterday for 3 pitchers. And I don't know. I was thinking about Steven Matz's legacy as a Met. And, there were so many moments of frustration for him. And yet you think about his debut against the Reds. You think about his performance in the postseason in 2015. There were moments when you saw how great this kid could be, and it never quite lived up to that in terms of his legacy as a Met. And I'm wondering, Ronnie, from your perspective, what do you think prevented him from being the pitcher that we all hoped that he would be with the Mets?
Well, first, I don't know about you guys. I was very melancholy. I knew he probably was going to be traded, but still, as everyone knows that would watch this show, just an outstanding young man, does so much. I really like him as a person. That makes it hard sometimes when you're in the booth. What stopped him, prevented him? I think early in his career, Gary, when he was drafted, injuries set him back, where those couple of years that he did not pitch when everyone is trying to really develop their game for the major leagues, he had to sit idle. So I certainly think that hurt. I think once he got to the major league level and had some instant success, you talked about Cincinnati and the postseason, I think he never could get past early in his career now, that when he didn't feel 100%, I think that was always weighing on his mind was the next injury around the corner, or that's kind of how it felt to me. I could be wrong. And then once he got over that injury hump, I think that he's a very impressionable young person. I think he is the kind of young guy that wants to please people and wants to listen to their advice about how he could do it the best way. And I think he ended up with 100 different ways to do it and never could really find his groove. And I'm sure I'm with you guys. I wish him so much success. I hope he goes to Toronto and lights it up. Left-handers, especially tall left-handers, as athletic and as talented as he, sometimes take a little longer, and maybe it will for him.
Keith, do you have any thoughts?
I do. I think that Steve a lot was very hard on himself. We saw it out there on the mound. He was trying to battle that. It was a constant battle, and he made great strides emotionally. He would give up a base hit, and it was like, the sky was falling, and he really fought himself. And I think that he made great strides there. My feeling is, he was a hometown kid, the Long Island kid, family. A lot of times when players get traded, it takes the pressure off, the great expectations that came with Steven when he got called up. And then, of course, the great opening game he had, his debut was just off the charts. I think when you get to a new organization, you initially, it's the first trade, you're hurt, then you realize you get over it, and at least you feel like you're going to an organization that wants you. And a lot of players I've seen young in their career with the team they were drafted by, they don't blossom until they're traded. And this could happen with Steven. He's got the arm. And what Ronnie mentioned about the injuries, I think that's behind him now. And that's the one positive. I mean, he always got his elbow problem. When they fixed that in the last 2 years, he was durable and you can rely on him to go out there. Where the first couple years in the big leagues, 3 years, you didn't know Steven was going to make the next fifth day start.
I want to echo what Ronnie said. He's just such a great person. A 3-time Roberto Clemente Award nominee for all the great work that he's done off the field, but also just a nice guy who, ironically enough, allowed his emotions sometimes to get the best of him on the mound. And I find it interesting that he and Anthony Kay will now wind up on the same pitching staff, a couple of lefties who went to the same high school on Long Island. It would be interesting if they could blossom in Toronto. And he'll be under the tutelage, Stephen will, of Pete Walker, who's done some good work as the pitching coach in Toronto.
Great.
So that opens up some salary, and it also opens up some rotation room. And Trevor Bauer is still out there. And there's been a lot of conversation about Bauer. And what he's looking for and what the Mets are interested in offering him. And the Mets have, it seems, kind of played it coy, allowing it to get to this point. And I don't know that there are a lot of suitors left out there, maybe the Dodgers and maybe the Mets. Do you see this happening? Do you see a Mets Bauer marriage as something that's going to actually take place here?
Go ahead, Keith.
Well, I don't want to read too much into it right now, Gary. They got 3 minor leaguers for Steve, who really had a very not a good year by any stretch of the imagination. Remember, this is a building process here where Steve Cohen and Sandy Alderson have said they're building from the bottom up and trying to replenish the minor leagues. Well, they got three pitchers out of the deal, so that's part of the replenishment of the minor leagues. Whether they're in the hunt for Bauer right now, I only know what I read in the paper. He certainly would be a wonderful addition to the rotation. My goodness, who wouldn't want him? But it's going to be about the dollars. How much of the purse strings are they going to open up? And that's a big question. And I'm sure it will all unfold before us. I think pretty rapidly.
I think part of the Mets being a little coy now, Gary, speaks to exactly what you said. There doesn't seem to be a lot of suitors out there for a guy that you would think there would be at least a third of the teams in on, and at least a half dozen teams that would be considering giving him a long-term contract. So you can be coy when maybe 1 or 2 teams are involved. That being said, any team would be better having Trevor Bauer on your ball club coming off a Cy Young year. You're asking if I think it's going to happen for the Mets. I don't know. Like my first thought when I got to work today was that somehow the Dodgers are going to steal Bauer. I don't know why I think that. There's no science behind it. It's just a gut feeling that he's not going to end up with the 4 or 5 or 6 year deal that maybe every pitcher would like. And on a short run, the Dodgers certainly could offer him whatever they want.
I'm wondering, there's some hesitation in some quarters about Bauer because he is a controversial figure. He's had these social media confrontations, which I think are a red flag for some people. He's obviously very outspoken in a lot of different ways. So I'm wondering, from a team perspective, whether it's the Mets or the Dodgers or anybody else, are you better off going big on a 1 year or even 2 year contract, kind of to see whether he fits in your program, as opposed to committing 4 or 5 years for a personality like that, forgetting about the pitching side of it?
My first thought, sorry, Keith, my first thought when they were going to have, when the first number was floated out that it was going to be Garrett Cole money or north of Garrett Cole money for a year, my first thought was Jacob deGrom. That was my first thought, because he has an opt-out after 2022, and he certainly has been the best pitcher in baseball, in my opinion. And you're going to pay a guy $5 million or more than deGrom makes, which would set for an interesting negotiation after 2022. That being said, yes, if I were to see if, and it's not, let's take the controversial stuff off the table. He's a young man that really wants to fit in an organization that is moving forward analytics and knows how to get the correct readings on spin rates, and he needs to work almost like an engineer in a lab, before in between his starts. And can the Mets provide that? I'm sure they can with Jeremy Hefner and all that they have. But at the same time, a 1 or 2 year contract, 3 year contract with an opt out maybe for Bauer might be the way to go.
My feeling is at the Bauer stage of his career, why would he take it? I wouldn't take a 2 year deal. I'm going for the big kahuna. I want the big payday. This is his, it's his big chance. This is his last. Yeah. He'll be older guy. We know how they're trending in baseball today. Whether they like the younger players. From a Mets standpoint, looking in the future, you got Stroman and Syndergaard who can adios next year. You now lock in the Cy Younger for 4 years, and I think a fifth option, then that kind of anchors your and kind of gives you a little insurance policy going forward next season if in fact you lose those two big guns down there. And as far as this season is concerned, my gosh, you got a starting four that is pretty formidable.
Well, I think from a Bauer perspective, and you make a good point, Keith, your value is never going to be higher than it is coming off a Cy Young year. So you want to cash in. However, if somebody offers you $35 million for 1 year, as opposed to, multiple years at a lower average annual value, you can bet on yourself, take that big chunk of cash up front and see whether maybe you can cash in the next year. Then again, who knows what the economics in baseball are going to be like next year going into a potential labor confrontation. So assuming that the Mets have enough room now, because they shed the $5 million. By the way, I just want to say that kudos to the Mets for how they handled Matz, because there was every chance that he was going to be non-tendered at the end of last year, and they decided not to non-tender him. So they could have gotten nothing for him, and they wound up tendering him a contract and then shedding the contract and getting 3 players back, which I think is brilliant on their part. It could have easily gone the other way. But so you've shed the $5 million contract. You've opened up enough salary space, I think, that you can make one more big play before you get to the competitive balance tax. So the question is, Bauer or Jackie Bradley Jr.? For this team right now, which commodity do you think is more valuable, the center fielder or the starting pitcher?
I personally think they have enough depth in the starting pitching. I think Bauer takes them over the competitive luxury tax. Remember, they got rid of Matz. We're talking about that today, 5.5 or whatever million he's making. But they did sign Aaron Loop, and Aaron Loop is going to make around $3 million. So now we're at $2.5 million again. So boy, maybe it's an old picture of me, but boy, I'd love to have Jackie Bradley Jr. out in center field and doing some of the things that he does. I've only seen him, I don't know, a dozen times in a game. And, he's very Juan Lagares at his best in center field kind of outfielder.
Well, it's certainly, it's a double-edged sword, so to speak. I always love pitching. I played in that run of you too. You were part of that. I can't tell you what it's like to have, from an offensive point of view, to have a starting rotation that goes out there and can dominate and, take the pressure off the offense. And another thing too is that the Met offense is very formidable. That they're going to score runs, bar injury, which that's the intent. That's the unknown, but you just can never say one way or the other. To me, it's all about financial. Even if it goes over the threshold, it's how much is it going to go over? The Mets have around 27 million to work with, right? Or 25 million to work with. So if you give them 35 and you're 10 million over, what is the tax on 10 million? So I go with the pitching.
I always find it fascinating that the pitcher wants the position player and Keith wants the pitcher. It's just it's a constant source of fascination for me.
And it's almost every time. Every time we're like this.
Well, then let me ask you this, okay? The way things are configured right now, assuming that that Nimmo stays in center field, you've got Dom Smith maybe to play left, and if there's not a DH, we don't know. But the bottom line is that JD Davis likely winds up at third base in this scenario. I mean, it could be McNeil and you play Guillorme at second. There are other configurations you could put together, but there's been talk about the big trade, right? Chris Bryant, Nolan Arenado, supposedly both available. Is that something that you think the Mets should be considering, bringing in a big name third baseman to take that spot for the long term?
I wouldn't want to go there, to be honest with you. Arenado's obviously, I think, the greatest fielding third baseman I've laid my eyes on. And he's certainly had great years, but you look at his, you always got Colorado to deal with, home and away. One thing about Arenado, he's good in the clubhouse. He wants to win. He's a solid guy. I don't know much about Bryant, but he has diminished over the last few years since they've won. And I would lean away from that. So I wouldn't go for that big one right there. I mean, you're talking about the luxury tax too. You're taking on big salaries. I mean, huge salaries.
The right-handed bat of JD Davis is very important, I think, for this lineup. The question is every day playing third base. I think that's certainly a question that needs to be answered. I thought he improved earlier last year from the year prior. His numbers, if you look at them, and the analytics will tell you that he hit in some bad luck last year. That's why his average down. His on-base percentage was even better last year, but his slugging percentage was down 250 points. That is a little bit of a sign, although it was only 60 games. I think right now, if I were running the ball club, I think it's time, and Keith mentioned about in the clubhouse. I don't think there's anyone that's beloved more in that clubhouse by especially the young players, and he's one of them, than JD Davis. And maybe this is his chance to give him a shot.
Yeah, what would happen to the Cookie Club if
yeah, exactly.
JD were to go? I guess Carlos Carrasco could step in because he's the cookie.
That's right.
So Ronnie mentioned the deal for Aaron Loop, who had, I think, the best year of his career last year pitching for Tampa Bay, and particularly tough against lefties. But I wonder, there's been a lot of conversation about the Mets' lack of a lefty. They've got some fringy guys, Stephen Tarpley and Daniel Zamora. Jerry Blevins has a minor league deal. But the fact that they needed a lefty in the bullpen, and you can understand that because of all the great lefty bats in the National League East, whether it's, Juan Soto, Bryce Harper, so the question is, for me, with the 3-batter rule that was instituted last year, from what you saw of the way those scenarios played out, is the lefty reliever as valuable now as he was in prior years?
It certainly has made managing a lot more difficult when you make that decision. I still think you need a solid left-hander and a late in the game to get the big left-handed out. And, what I've seen of Loop, he's a side armor. And if you look at his splits, he's like 264 against right-handers, and he's much, much more effective against lefties. And to me, that's obvious. I saw him in the World Series, and he almost gave up a bomb to, I forget the right-hand hitter in Tampa, because he had to stay in that game. And he doesn't really have a sinker. He's pretty straight, and his breaking ball, because he's out here sidearm, a little above sidearm, his breaking ball's flat. Now that is trouble for him facing a right-hander. So I don't think he's a great crossover guy. I think he's going to be a guy that's going to come in and get your big left-handed out. So I'm not answering your question. I'm kind of giving you an analysis what I think of Loop, which I think that he has his pluses and his minuses, but I think he's going to be the go-to guy late to get a Harper, get a Freddie Freeman, a Juan Soto.
I think he'll be used. And to answer your question, I thought that it was less of an issue than I thought it was going to be last year. I thought the having the left-hander come in and having to face 3 at some point was going to be less of a problem. And I think it was less of a problem is because how they're going to use Loop. And that is 2 outs and Harper's coming up and he's going to be used. And if he doesn't get Harper out, then you're in trouble. If he gets Harper out, then he's out of the inning and you send him to the showers. So, Keith, you mentioned the World Series, but in the series against Houston, Loop was amazing. And in fact, might have saved that bullpen in that series. So he had a good series and a bad series in the postseason. He still throws hard, even though it's from the side. And one of the things we saw from Tampa Bay in the postseason, and maybe we'll see from more teams because they seem to be above the cutting edge, is that versatility in the bullpen. You have right-handers throwing sidearm, left-handers throwing sidearm, guys throwing 99, other guys with hard sliders, so that you get a different look at all times. Maybe the Mets are going for that.
So where does this leave the Mets bullpen at this point? In terms of the depth, in terms of the quality of the arms, do you think that they're done, or do they need to keep on adding?
Go ahead, Ronnie.
I think they're done. I think they're where they're going to be. I think Trevor May was a big signing because it kind of pushes everyone down or up a notch, whatever way you're looking at it. And I think they're done. I think they're done with their rotation. If they don't sign Bauer, they're done with their bullpen, and whether they add a piece at center field, it's not all on the Mets. They add a piece in center field, because if they had the answer to the DH, it would make it a lot easier. So a guy like Jackie Bradley Jr., who's not a DH, is collateral damage for this indecision about the DH, because you can't make a decision if you're the Mets, because where are you going to play everybody? So that's the issue.
I think Lugo's going back in the pen. Okay, that's a must, and that's going to strengthen the pen. And he was beautiful as the setup man, and hopefully Diaz, who pitched better last year, can be your closer, or Lugo can be your closer. You've got guys in that bullpen, veterans that have closed in other teams. There's a lot of question marks. I mean, Familia did not have a great year last year. Betances did not have a great year last year. But I think they're pretty set in their bullpen. And to me, the only thing is, how many left-handers are you going to have in that bullpen when you carry so many guys? Are they going to carry 8 or 7? Who knows? I don't nominate.
We don't even know what the roster size is going to be, so there's no way of knowing that. It's
right. So
there's so much that's up in the air.
You agree, Gary, about Lugo going back?
Well, that's exactly right. That was going to be my caveat. I think they're done in the bullpen as long as Lugo is a relief pitcher. If Lugo, for some reason, they decide is going to be a starter again, then that throws the entire equation out of whack, and they'd probably have to continue to be in the market. So the big prize, I think, that most Met fans were looking at going into the offseason was JT Realmuto. And the Mets decided to go in a different direction and sign James McCann. And Realmuto this week winds up signing back with the Phillies. And I'm wondering, with the Mets having added some significant pieces, particularly Lindor, where does that leave the balance of power in the division? The Braves have won the division 3 years in a row. To me, they're still a bat short, and it doesn't look like they're going to bring Marcell Ozuna back. And they're also, I think, dependent on Mike Soroka making a significant recovery and coming back at the start of the year. They hedged by bringing in Charlie Morton, but Charlie's 37 now. So I'm wondering where you see the balance of power in the division, and where the Mets fit into that.
Well, I think Atlanta's still strong, but you're right, Gary. Let's not forget the last 2 seasons. One of the reasons their offense was so strong was Donaldson in 2019 and Ozuna in 2020. 2 big right-handed bats behind Freeman. Maybe Riley at third base comes into his own. I don't know, but what you're getting with Ozuna and Donaldson. They haven't got that guy yet, but I still think Atlanta's at the top of the heap. I think the Mets now, coming from tied last place, have moved up. I think they're the second strongest team in the division. I think the Marlins are the third strongest team, with Washington and Philadelphia coming after that. And as far as the Realmuto signing, no one will take away. He's one of the great players in the game, the best catcher in the game. But to me, I think Philadelphia, and this is probably a strong stance to take, they have so many holes that they needed to fill that I don't know if Realmuto was Realmuto to me became the pressurized sign that you have to please your fan base, because I think Philadelphia has more holes than that, and they're not going to be able to fill a lot of them because of the contract to Realmuto.
Well, I think everybody has question marks. I mean, the Braves starting rotation, Soroka getting hurt is just, devastating. And we don't know what his status is going to be. It was a serious injury, but you don't know what what Ian Anderson is going to do. I don't mean Jethro Tull. You don't know what he's going to do his second season. He pitched great for them. You look at Washington, Gary, now that they got John Lester. I mean, that's a pretty good starting rotation, even though it's beginning to age.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be a pretty formidable starting five to go in and play a 3-game series against that team, where they're going to run 3 solid starters at you, and they're going to have to rely on those guys to really have big seasons. The Phillies, to me, I'm not a fan of the Phillies, and I'm still not a fan of the Phillies. I don't like their offense. I don't like their defense. I don't like their bullpen. I don't think they've done much with their bullpen.
You need a shortstop.
I just think that I think the Phillies are in for some hard times. So what's the other team I'm missing here?
Marlins.
And I talked about. But anyway, I just think that it's going to be the Mets and I think the Braves, and then the Nationals, I think, are going to have something to say.
To me, the Nationals are the most interesting team because you're right. Their starting pitching is strong but aging. But they brought in 2 guys to help in the middle of their order, trading for Josh Bell, signing Carl Schwarber, and you wonder the kind of impact, putting those 2 guys together with Soto and Turner at the top of the batting order. How does that impact their offense? Because, Howie Kendrick played an enormous role for that team over the last couple of years, and he's decided to retire. Bell is capable of being a monster from both sides of the plate. Schwarber, we've seen what he can do at his best. So I'm wondering just how potent their offense can be, because I agree with you. The Phillies offense is lacking. I mean, they need Alec Boehm to have an enormous sophomore year, and they need Hoskins to bounce back. And the Marlins don't have enough offense for me either, even though their young starting pitching, I think, is terrific. But the Nationals are the intriguing team to me because of the imports that they brought in for the middle of their order.
Gary, I think the imports, the protection for Soto, they're going to do fine. But what I think you're going to see from the Nationals is what we saw from the Mets a few seasons ago. Outstanding pitching, inability to catch the ball. That's what I think the problem for the Nationals is going to be.
And, Gary, where the Mets would desire greatly a DH, because it would solve their issues with Alonso and help me out here.
Tom Smith, yeah.
Tom Smith, the same thing. Bell and Schwarber are defensively challenged players, severely defensively challenged. And it would behoove them, the Nationals, to have a DH where they don't have to put them out in the field.
All right, so we've only got a couple of minutes left, so let's take some questions. Let's see. Garden State Gardener on YouTube says Jackie Bradley plays the deepest center field in baseball. As a pitcher, Ronnie, does that concern you?
It doesn't concern me. If you're a good pitcher, it doesn't concern good pitching because you don't feel like you're going to give up 2, 3, 4 hits in a game. You're just trying to make sure that when you make a mistake, it's not over their heads. Now, I know last year, I think we talked about it, right, with Jacob deGrom, who wanted his center fielders playing shallower because if he gave up a extra base hit, it was on him. I personally felt just the opposite, and certainly never was in the class of deGrom. I always felt like I'm not going to give up 2, 3, 4 hits in a row. So just make sure if I make a mistake, cover me out there in the gaps. That's how I felt.
So you had basically a 21st century philosophy that it's hard to put 2 or 3 hits in a row, right? Isn't that basically the way the game is played now?
That's how I felt. I mean, it didn't always come to pass, but that's how I felt.
All right. So Gregory on Facebook, Keith, wants to know, how has Hadji's offseason been?
Oh, he's right here, actually. He's been great. He loves the warm weather. He's 18 now. He's got a little arthritis.
18.
He's 18. Come on, say hi, Hadji. Come on, say hi. He loves it down here. This is his little nook right here that gets the southern sun right on him. He's very, very content. He's been waking me up at the crack of dawn every morning, and he's never did that before, with loud meows. And I have to get up and feed him, and then I can go back to bed.
So when your cat turns 18, he turns into a rooster, is basically what you're saying.
Yeah, that's about it. I mean, yeah, very good.
I'm waiting for the Alice Cooper music to come chiming in.
All right, boys. I think that'll wrap it up for this week's edition of Beyond the Booth Live. We'll be back next Thursday at 4:00. It's good to see you guys. You know, it's good to check in. I still don't know if spring training is going to be starting on time, but you know, we'll see each other eventually in person.
Who knew our strength might be working just once a week?
Well, yeah. And someday we might even be allowed in the same room.
Yeah, right.
All right. See you guys next week.
Okay.
Bye, guys. See ya.